All right. Hello, everyone. This is the July 12th, 2024 meeting of the Node Loaders team, special edition, TypeScript edition. Uh, yeah, I guess, Marco, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So, well, I think we are all here because of the TypeScript PR that I've opened. So I've received a lot of feedback, and I've tried to like in this few like couple of weeks that the PR has been. I think it's a couple of weeks, but in this time, like I received a lot of feedback, and like I think there are some interesting points that we want to discuss before like even landing the PR. So if we take the issue that we have, I will paste it in the chat. Just 1 second. Um, So, like what has emerged is that probably we would want to support all the like the main problem is that we like TypeScript doesn't offer the stability guarantees. This has been the main driver for the whole PR, and therefore we tried to remove all the like have the smallest subset as possible in order to have as little breaking changes as possible. This has been the drive of my PR and the reasoning why I wanted to land with such a strict type stripping. But I guess this is the place to discuss if maybe those fear that we have as project in terms of stability are not 100% um, real, and there is the possibility of supporting the full TypeScript syntax, such as enums, decorators, etc. And yeah, I guess this has been the thing that has been requested the most to support the full TypeScript syntax, and also about the file extension, which currently we only support dot like the real file extension instead of the transformed one to JavaScript to .js to .ts. So these are the 2 points that currently we might want to discuss, and if there are alternative approach to that, we also want to discuss that. So, is there anyone from the like that wants to introduce himself? And I don't know how do we
Yeah, I
want
was gonna say,
to.
who's here from the TypeScript team?
Jeffrey, would you mind promote Daniel or someone?
I've promoted him a few times. I think maybe he's having trouble joining as a panelist. Ah, there he is. Okay. So yeah, I know Daniel's from TypeScript. Is anyone else here from TypeScript? Jake, Wesley, Andrew. Hello. So, um, maybe we should start with you guys. Like, I guess, what are your concerns if like, say the PR lands as is currently written? What would be your concerns with that? Or what would you wish could change? You're muted, Daniel.
One is that the subsetting that's being done here makes me a little unhappy because it means that you don't actually support all TypeScript, just the parts that were decided to be good, and you don't actually get any stronger compatibility guarantees from that subsetting. Like it's just a fact that we don't make those kinds of, like, generally speaking, we have good backwards compatibility. We are usually more backwards compatible than Node is for a significantly longer period of time. But like, we don't version the same way as Node, and we don't have like, Node is like these concerns aren't first-class concerns that'll block us from making these changes. It's like, at some level, you do need to accept that we might make a breaking change, or what you would perceive as a breaking change to the emit, and you'd have to like hold back the version or something. And like, setting specific compiler flags or forbidding specific syntax doesn't really change that.
Yeah, but like, do you see from our perspective, like, we want that the code that is written today needs to last for the full lifespan of the Node version. So if I write code that is valid for Node 20, needs to stay valid for the whole 3 years that Node 20, like, from when it's started to when it goes end of life. So this is the biggest concern.
And this is also a big difference where you'll differ from Node and Bun, which haphazardly update TypeScript to latest with every patch version and say that breaking changes in TypeScript basically just aren't their problem. And whereas, like, you're basically saying we're willing to be behind.
So this could be solved
or as a subset. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this could lead to us to lock the version of TypeScript. We would say, hey, we don't support this until the next major. So this could be one of the possible solution for us, because we absolutely need the stability.
Right. You're willing to say you're willing to be both behind and incomplete.
Rob has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Hi. So I guess I know that Wes and I have discussed this quite a lot in the past, but I wanted to kind of just clarify that point, which is that, or really ask the question, which is that if we stick to the subset that is currently in the PR, is there anything that's likely to break in the future? The reason I ask that is that it's a very conservative subset. And so I wonder what might break in the future. Now, I'm not asking about like adding features to TypeScript, like type syntax and so on. But with respect to like what might break and go wrong in terms of a future compiler not being able to handle code that is, working with the current one, is there anything that we really predict could be broken in future?
Wes?
I guess, and sorry, to clarify, my point is that most of the breaks that have happened in the past and could be predicted in the future are related to divergences from JavaScript. And
so
it's
the types as comments proposal that is currently advancing basically demonstrates that no syntax we have is sacred, and TC39 feels like they're open to usurp any of it at any point in the future. And if they did, we would, by necessity, introduce flags to make ourselves align with that behavior. So if Node doesn't have a way to like pass or apply those flags at specific points in time to specific code, it's just not going to be able to move forward with us. And that's like the real issue. Like, the TypeScript of today isn't guaranteed to be the TypeScript of the future, because we guarantee that we will sync with whatever TC39 does, and TC39 does not make affordances for us. So whatever happens will happen.
Daniel, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
I'm going through
There
my
you
phone.
are. Now I can hear you.
I've been fighting AV issues this morning, so I apologize. Okay. Trying to back up a little bit here. So I think that there's like a broader sort of concern to frame things, right? One is that there is syntax within TypeScript that, by the nature of it being a superset, there's always sort of a risk of it possibly of JavaScript possibly adopting some sort of construct that overlaps there, and whether or not the semantics or the syntax conflicts in some capacity. Now, when like we have representation on TC39, right? We are active on TC39. We try to do the best by our users and make sure that that doesn't happen impossible, right? Because TypeScript has a sizable ecosystem as well, and like we do need to make sure that there's no breakage there. There's an amount of stability within certain spaces that we will strive to ensure TypeScript users have, right? Like we will really push back on proposals that are starkly in contrast with like what our users have written, what they expect, things like that. Now, like you're looking at specific features, right? I mean, you've all come to the conclusion that the types of text must be pretty stable, but what about the evaluation of other features? I mean, it sounds like through the conversation on the issue tracker, there was sort of like this, like, we're not really sure about how namespaces work and whatnot, like what the status is there. Like, should we talk about that in some capacity? Should we, like, is there any sort of need to get a better understanding of that stability and like what those sorts of transforms are? Should I get into some of the specifics around like the language of the concept, the compiler versus other things there?
I mean, if you're open to it, I'd like to just go down the list of questions that I posted earlier this week, which includes that. But I think I'm gonna try to find it. Where did I put it? I think the most fundamental question is, how do you feel about like as a project, how do you feel about transforms today? Like you mentioned already on the thread that you haven't introduced a new feature that requires JavaScript generation in years. Do you not plan to ever do that again? And do you consider the existing features that require generation to because like enums, apparently the docs recommend doing an alternative instead that doesn't require generation. Like and I think same thing someone found for namespaces. Is it like you're trying to, like maybe you haven't actually deprecated them, but is it like you're not going to add any more transforms and you're providing alternatives to the existing ones that people could migrate off so that if someone wants to write TypeScript without any transforms involved, they could, and that'll be increasingly common going forward?
So we probably have like differing opinions about certain features on the team, right? Like some people say, oh, well, if you're really trying to stick to like vanilla, TypeScript is types on top of JavaScript, like avoid those constructs. But the truth is that they're well supported in other tools and they're not really going away, and we're not planning on deprecating them at all, right? Now, and every time that like people ask, like, is this feature deprecated? We don't say that it is. We say like probably, what you should probably do is use what's more native in the language, like modules or things like that. In some cases, like enum's not exactly the case. But people kind of push back, right? People really push back and say like, why? I really find this feature useful. Why are you doing that? And so we can't take as a prescriptive of a stance as we would sometimes want, if that makes sense. Now that also said, for years, if you look at our design our design goal, like the page has mostly not changed for like a decade at this point. It sort of clumsily says something like this, where like we're not planning on introducing any new expression level syntax, which is, I mean, not exactly the point, but it's more like anything that impacts runtime, we don't typically add support to these days, right? Like, so there's sort of this basis of features that were introduced in the TypeScript 1.0 timeframe when like, who knew where JavaScript was actually going to go at this point? Like it was not clear. I mean, some of the features seemed like they were clearly bound to be, in JavaScript itself. And so even in like namespaces or previously called internal modules, that was actually part of a proposal within JavaScript, right? But things didn't pan out that way, and we either needed to ship, I assume, or you guys had to hold off, right? So we haven't done anything like that in years. I mean, there's the JSX stuff, if I look back on that. But that was put in a separate file type, and that's maybe a different conversation. There's stuff around enums being tweaked slightly in the behavior. I think Nicolo mentioned that in the thread. But the general thing has been that we basically steer clear of this because we are trying to play well with the JavaScript standards, like traffic, right? Every feature that kind of goes, we basically push for that to go through JavaScript. So a great example of this was the optional chaining operator. This was a feature that had like the most upvotes out of any feature on the issue tracker. And for years, we said we cannot do this without actually knowing what JavaScript is going to do with this feature, right? It would be fairly simple to implement. Everybody would be really happy. It would not have played well. So what we did instead was we took the feature to TC39. We didn't take the feature to TC39. We collaborated with the champions of the proposal and those who were able to help take it over once they brought it over to the starting line, right? Stage one. So like that's the way that we operate. We have operated for years, right? If we see something that is really useful and it's like runtime related, we collaborate in TC39, bring it to JavaScript, we push for that, and we basically keep the entire syntax space that we operate within in terms of stuff that is erasable, that basically is very unlikely to conflict with future JavaScript proposals like the as keyword or the satisfies operator, things like that. And basically use like things like no line terminators to ensure that existing JavaScript isn't impacted, so that we don't end up parsing things incorrectly in JavaScript files. So that's or parsing existing JavaScript incorrectly in TypeScript files. So that's a long way of saying no. We don't want to introduce new stuff in the syntax space.
Okay, Wes?
Yeah, like to summarize, we're not going to remove namespaces and enums. People are going to use them going forward. We're not going to tell people they're the best way to do things, but people are going to use them. And I don't consider something that says parses TypeScript that doesn't parse them as like a real or full TypeScript parser. But despite that, I think the fundamental thing that I think is weird is that like TypeScript is a project with just a separate versioning and stability guarantee than Node itself. It feels like any TypeScript supported node should just be a separately upgradable component, just like NPM is, that's maybe shipped with Node or enabled by default, but can at least be updated out of band by users if they need
Well,
to.
that already exists. I mean, that's like
Right.
-- import equals TSX.
Yeah, but it doesn't ship in. There's not a version that is shipped in box. Is my point. It is upgradable. Like you can, you can pass that, but there's not a default version that's provided that users can then upgrade if it doesn't suit their needs.
So with regard to that, I opened an issue like a year ago or so on the TypeScript repo asking if the TypeScript team would consider basically providing that. Like, we could just like pick a winner between TSX and TS Node and TSIMP and the other competitors of that. But if there was something like TypeScript / Node or whatever, like an official set of hooks, customization hooks that the TypeScript team maintained, then it would be very clear, like, this is the one, and then Node could like install it, but like however we design the UX for it. Like the first time they run a TypeScript file, we print something like run npm install TypeScript and then whatever, like instructions to set it up, or we automate the setup for them or whatever. Those are details we can work out. But the blocker previously has been like, oh, there's all these userland modules, and if we pick one, then it's like we're kind of shutting down competition and so on. But picking the official one would be kind of a no-brainer. That would be like an obvious reason why we would pick the one that TypeScript provided, but that doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, shipping one inbox has the same effect, right?
What's that?
I mean, shipping one inbox, like the PR that you currently have up, has the same effect, right?
Well, what we're shipping, like the reason that like Node could make our own competitor to TSX if we wanted to, that was published as a separate package and did everything that TSX does and TS Node does and so on. But that's a huge job. Like, that's a lot of effort that like the maintainers of TSX put into that library, and we don't have the bandwidth for that. We have the bandwidth for Marco's PR, but we don't even have the bandwidth really for like, we've been talking about for years creating some kind of like automated UX flow to guide users into adding TypeScript support, but it's like never even finished the design phase because we don't have the resources for it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, just to give you some perspective on like the whole, doing the official thing and whatever, right? We actually see the proliferation of other compiler tools as like a net positive, right? Like we actually can, in terms of like build speed, we probably cannot compete in raw build speed against, some of the native tools that like, down here, right? Like SWC, these builds, like other tools like that. And so like we actually recommend new projects use those tools in general. So it's kind of a net positive, whether or not, thinking about it from the angle of like you have sort of a blessed version, I see a little bit more what you have in mind there of that. Now what, I mean, maybe I should put myself on the queue first, right? Like I see the other hand up too, so I don't know if Wesley or Mark.
Can I just say one quick thing I should have mentioned earlier? Since we've had those discussions, like last time we talked about it was like a year ago. At the time, like TS Node and TSX seemed to be like the two, but TS Node seems to be moribund lately. So that might make it easier in that if TSX is the only actively maintained one, then maybe we could just pick it as the winner. TS Imp is also very actively maintained, but it has a different focus. Like it's trying to do type checking, whereas TSX is not. So like we could maybe support both, and like the UX could be like, oh, if you want type checking, click here, install TSIMP, otherwise TSX or something like that. So I think there is a way forward for that approach, but that doesn't mean we can't also do the type stripping.
Well, I mean,
yeah, sorry.
Sorry,
I just wanted to say, like,
go ahead.
Okay, let's run through the queue. Yeah.
Wes, I think you never took your hand down, or did you have something else?
I had a second point to my first one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like it. Ideally, the component that compiles TS would be upgradable and would respect some kind of versioning on a per package basis, because like packages support more versions of Node than just latest LTS Node. And so ideally the version of TypeScript that they're compiled with can be changed to match that. But those are the two big concerns that I have, because right now it's not a concern when you just ship TypeScript as JavaScript, because typically a TypeScript user will either intentionally or accidentally compile their JavaScript down to either ES5 or ES6, and it'll run on like 20,000 versions of Node unless they actually like use an API from the latest version of Node. Whereas if you only have the one built-in version of whatever Node ships as an option, you can unintentionally break packages that are shipping TypeScript that will just not work because they relied on a subtle change that happened between TypeScript 5.8 and 5.9 or something.
Okay, Marco?
So, like, the point is that the fact that Node.js is able to run TypeScript doesn't remove the fact that users will also run their local version of TypeScript on their VS Code. They're going to perform type checking. So users already have type checking, all this stuff usually in VS Code on the IDE. So like everything that requires like type checking, that's that can be handled outside Node.js. What we want to do is simply be able to, like, once the user has validated that their TypeScript version is fine, it compiles and everything, we want to run it. So type stripping actually removes the need for like to support all those different flavors. Like if you say that the syntax is stable, it means that if we perform just type stripping, that would not be breaking very often because the syntax is stable. So that's why we thought about it as a long-term, like a possible solution to the different approach on stability that Node.js and TypeScript have. While performing type checking might be break more often, but just like type stripping, in my it seems like the most optimistic choice. Of course, if TypeScript ships new feature, as we upgrade our, in my PR there is SWC, we upgrade SWC and we support the features. What matters is that the current syntax is backwards compatible. So if someone has written TypeScript for version 5.x, when upgrading to 5.x plus 1, that previous syntax should not be broken. And that's my concern, because other than that, I think whether we ship enums or we don't, I think we can enable enums. That's not the main concern. My concern is more about the stability, and I would like to know if we just do type stripping, we upgrade SWC, we support newer version. By supporting a newer version of TypeScript, do we break existing users? That's my question.
Uh,
I think Jake was next.
Can we answer the question directly? Whatever.
Okay.
I mean, the answer is for do we break existing users? Yes and no. No, because we don't publish changes that break all of our users. We've never done a breaking change that says everybody has to change everything. That's just not something we've ever done. Yes, because we do make changes where 0.01% of our users will be broken. That's the kind of change we make. There will be an edge case that will change, and people will have that encounter that edge case will need to update. That's the kind of thing that will happen.
Okay, Jake. You're muted.
I think that I was actually wanted to talk about the plugin and advertising, what people should install or whatever differently, but I think we're on a different track of the conversation.
If I could respond to that, I think here I'm going to lower everybody's hands, because if you never put them down, then I can't keep track of who's next in the queue. So we already support people adding customization hooks to use, TSX and so on. We want to make the process easier. We have an open discussion right now for adding a config file to Node. That would be an important piece in this, that they run node file.ts, and then it could update their config file to set up the hooks for them and blah, blah, blah. They can do it themselves right now, where we want to make it easier for people. And that will be completely full-blown full TypeScript. They can put in their dev dependencies an exact version of TypeScript that's whatever they want. It can use, and did it with TSX. They can use tsconfig.json. There should be nothing unsupported in that way, and they can, use whatever versions they want. Something that we have to ship within Node just can't be that. We can't have that. We already have the ability for what you're asking for. Yes, it can be easier. The UX can be improved, but we're committed to doing that in addition to putting something inside Node Core. From my perspective, the advantage of putting something in Node Core, obviously it's even easier still, because users don't have to install a dependency. They can just write a one-off script that's a single file, and assuming it's the subset of TypeScript that Node supports, and it can just run, things like that. I would hope that someday we can, if the type annotations proposal ever graduates, then that makes our lives so much easier as Node maintainers, because we just get rid of SWC and V8 takes care of this for us, and that's it. And the other thing about supporting transforms or not supporting transforms is that if we don't support transforms, we also don't need source maps, because we just replace whatever's stripped out with white space, and the lines and columns don't change. and we're done. Like it's much easier to implement. It's much faster. Like that's ultimately the other reason to put this in core is like this early PR uses the WASM version of SWC, but we've been talking about trying to set up the node build chain to support Rust dependencies. And once we do that, then we can pull in the Rust version of SWC, include it as part of the native build of Node, and then it's like, rocket fast, and it just ships as part of Node core. That's like ultimately where I'd love to see this go. So anyway, now everyone's hands are down, so I don't know who to call on. But yeah, Jake.
The thing that I was actually wanted to ask about relating to that was I think there was maybe a discussion a while ago. My brain doesn't do well with time, but I think there was a question a while ago of if Node ever sees someone attempting to run a TS file, then suggests that they go to a Node stock page that tells them like just install this package. Was that the thing that you said that you didn't have the resourcing to do, or was that just maybe forgotten about?
Well,
Do you
no, I mean,
remember?
simply printing an error with a URL is something we can do. Like what I'd like to see done, what I think we have the capacity to do is, but it'll take a long time, like potentially a year or more, is like automate the process. So like rather than sending people to a web page with their instructions they need to follow, it just says something like, are you trying to run a TypeScript file? Yes, no. And if they do yes, it adds whatever dependencies they need, adds the config that they need, and then they run it again and it just works. Just like automate the process of what they currently have to do manually. Marco?
Just sorry,
Yeah.
point of order. Could we get Daniel back in the room, please?
Oh, sorry. This is like
So-
the fifth, about the 10th time I promoted him.
Like given that users can already use an external loader to perform type checking with the like full syntax, and they can do already like TypeScript support with loaders can already be done, and that works perfectly. Since we want to have something like improve the developer experience and let users run Node.js, we want something that works just out of the box. So like since like as you said, the syntax is stable, so if like we don't expect like major breakages, do you think that type stripping, whether supporting TypeScript features would be something to move forward? And also like something that I mentioned in the pull request was like, what if we have a test suite to make sure that we don't encounter, like by running type stripping, what if we create a test suite to make sure that we have this test suite and we know that we are up to date with the latest TypeScript version, and that when with the latest TypeScript version you don't break previous versions with type stripping.
So
Wes?
I think if
I was just calling on you, Wes.
I mean, let me illustrate what is inevitably going to be a common example of the issues with just type stripping, air quotes. Let's say we're in Node 22, and Node 22 does some form of stripping out types for TypeScript. And that's all well and good, and people start publishing packages with TypeScript code in them. Great. We then add the not keyword in typeland for negating types, something we've talked about for years. Then Node 22 comes out and has support for those negated types. Great. People now publish packages that include those negated types, and now people on Node 20 or 22 rather than 24 can't consume those packages that are now shipping those negated types, even though the TypeScript is just supposed to be stripped out, because there's no forward compatibility concern for any libraries, right? Even though TypeScript is supposed to be air quotes erasable. Whereas if they compile the TypeScript to JavaScript, that's not a problem because it was actually erased in advance. And like that gets it a little bit one of our other concerns is the fact that we actually would rather people didn't actually ship TypeScript in the registry, because if they don't have declaration files in the registry, our checking gets very, very slow. And so we do want something to try and encourage people to actually run the build before they ship the TypeScript to the registry. Like that would be very good. Shipping straight TypeScript is actually just going to be like toxic to the ecosystem. The more of that happens, the worse the ecosystem's going to get over time, and it's just everything's going to slow down. But yeah, it just comes back to like my two concerns are just versioning. Like the type stripper that you're saying that you want to ship right now, like outside observer side, it looks exactly like a loader, like what TSX does, just a very simple one, like with some very opinionated choices of how it should work. And like that's fine. You can ship one of those. You can make one of those. I don't care. I just think it needs to be separately versionable and separately upgradable, and ideally configurable on a per package basis. That way you can deal with those forward compatibility concerns. Whether you build that yourself or bundle someone else's, I don't really care.
So, apart from the gratuitous apologies on my side, I have to figure something out on my computer. I want to kind of dig into some of the UX things that you all mentioned that are pretty interesting to us, right? Like the idea of honing that flow. Like someone says, I want to run a TypeScript file, and instead of just saying an error of like, hey, here's some ways you can do that, there could just be a way to get that on demand. You know, that does jive pretty well with a little bit of how we've been thinking about, you know, options of making it easier to use TypeScript in other environments too, like possibly dev tools in the browser, things like that. Because at the end of the day, there is this notion of who you're sort of prioritizing, right? And in terms of like dev tools and whatnot, it is the current user of an application, right? Like, sorry, in the browser, you don't typically want to ship these sorts of things because they're really concerned about the end user, not the developer, right? And so the developer experience is very much about the opt-in in this case. And similarly, right, like there is a little bit of overlap in what Wesley just said of like, we don't want people really shipping TS to the registry, like to NPM, because, right, like it just ends up being more source code to ingest. And so that this notion of like on-demand loader that you could adopt, I think that might be the right decoupling, because it doesn't provide any. You have a much lower bar in terms of compatibility concerns, because it's on a per user basis for the most part, and there's sort of an expectation that it would be a per user thing. And technically, you could run it in production if you really wanted, but you'd have to lock down on that specific version as well. And it really would discourage people from culturally being okay with just shipping TS files in the registry, because not everybody's going to have that installed in some cases. People will want to be maximally compatible and not sort of push people into like using this workflow that really wouldn't be endorsed by people working on Node or working on the TypeScript team. So if that's sort of a way of relieving a little bit of the stress and still providing a great end user workflow for developers, I think that's something that we would probably be open to contributing to and working on and thinking through, right? Like, I don't have the answers to, you know, is it a custom sort of loader that the TypeScript team builds in some capacity? Like, I'm not totally sure about that, but if there's sort of like a work to be done, then we could explore that and possibly help contribute there too. I think the other thing that was mentioned in the chat, wasn't exactly raised, was, is there the possibility of not doing this within Node modules, right? So that way you kind of like do that encouragement. And there is a little bit of subtlety there, probably with like real paths and like monorepo development and things like that. But I I just want to say, like, there's a little bit of risk there. We'd have to think that through if we ever did that. But I think the approach around the loader might have a fit here. Yeah, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so they're not either or. Like we already have the approach with loaders, and that's existed for like 4 years now. Now it's still experimental, it's still not stable. If that once it finally stabilizes and if we build better UX around helping people set things up with it, presumably it'll become a more popular option. But it's already been out there for quite a long time, and still like year after year when we do our annual surveys, like better TypeScript support is the number one request that people have for us. So like
Right.
they just don't want to do that. Like users want it built in. They want the experience that Dino provides. They want the experience that Bun provides. Of course, we also have users that want to run exactly the same code for 3 years in an LTS and continue to do patch and minor updates throughout that entire 3 years and not have their code break. So those are the constraints we're up against. Like I'm glad you guys all like the custom hooks approach, but we already have that and we're continuing to support that. We're not proposing getting rid of that. And we want to keep
The
making it
flow
better.
is, right?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that the flow of getting someone to that point of automatically doing it, saying like, "Do you want me to do this?" Yes, and then kind of getting it. That might be a valid way of improving that flow and making it a little bit less frictiony, right? Like, is that something that you would see as a net positive, a way of achieving a lot of that without having something that is so tied into Node itself? Would that be like a valid approach?
I guess the question is like, why not both? Like, sure, that's great. We're already working on it, but what's the problem with also shipping the type shipping PR? Wes.
Kind of like what I was saying earlier, I don't really care whether it's implemented with a loader or whether it's implemented with an internal in Node. The exact details of the implementation don't particularly matter. If the net effect is the same, a user imports a TypeScript file and Node runs it, which is why like what you're implementing in Node right now has the effect of looking a lot like a loader that you simply like can't version or swap out, which is why I say the thing that's missing from the loader implementation, like, yeah, it ships in box, that's good, thumbs up, is the ability to upgrade it, swap it out, version it on a per package basis to solve all the forward compatibility, backwards compatibility, and just general configurability issues that it raises. Like, you can say that, picking a subset of TypeScript that we have opinions about will make it more stable, but conceptually, it's no more stable than anything else, like supporting the full language. So like that's just a conceptual issue that I take with that. And like that choice of stability is coming at the cost of like forward compatibility and user configurability.
Wes, you can't. Stability is not on the table. Okay, we're not going to like change Node stability guarantees. I know that doesn't align with TypeScript.
Well, I'm not saying
that's not something that's negotiable here.
I'm not saying to like Node ships npm in box, and npm is upgradable, downgradable, and changeable. Why is the approach not applicable here?
It is upgradable. If we upgrade SWC, it will support newer versions of it. Yes, and that's fine as long as newer versions don't break previous code.
No, point is like a user can upgrade npm to a new major version even if Node's not released yet.
A user can
in a major
TSX,
in a
whatever they
major
want.
version.
Joy, you had her hand up.
Yeah, I was actually going to raise the same point because when we talk about bundling something in Node, like there are actually two kind of bundling. One of them is bundling in that executable, that 100 megabyte thing. And the other thing is bundling it inside Turbo or the installer, like how npm is bundled. And then with that kind of bundling, you can kind of upgrade it if it's kind of like hoisted out of the executable. And you need a different way to like look it up and make the executable load it automatically. But the point is there is something separately stored on disk that can be kind of like replaced. And like that's also a bundling option.
Daniel?
I think I see a little bit more what you mean about the story of why not both. Like you're sort of thinking of it as like, can we get, a little bit of this, and then if you do need the full blown thing, then we could have like the full grow up option there too. And I think the big concern there is that, well, one is that you've still got sort of a locked in version of a subset of TypeScript, which is like only this version of Node understands, and if you need the new thing, you actually do need to upgrade as well. And it's a little bit of an awkward story. I think that's one part of it. The other thing is we really don't want to bifurcate the language and sort of make people feel like there's like TypeScript, the pure thing that Node understands how to work with, and then like the bad parts almost that you have to like opt in with a different thing. And that's like not the way that we try to, that's not the way we want to put the community and put them through churn in a sense, right? But then I think there's a third aspect of it, which I'm now having a hard time exactly remembering. But it's I mean it. I think that by encouraging people to still ship that, like it goes back to the encouraging people to ship TS and saying like it's actually valid to ship a TS file in Node modules. Like that is another sort of
I mean, people are already
cultural.
doing that. There are already whole registries for that. It's not us. It's not on us to like stop the world and tell people they can't do something.
But the registries that do that, they provide you with JS depending on your client. And so that's not, I mean, the reality of it is that like in theory, you could use Node with an alternative registry and an alternative package manager, and things like that. That's a fine workflow. I think that's not the 99 point however many 9% case. And there's sort of a reality there. And so this is, maybe that's just a growing pain, right? Like the React Native ecosystem had this where people were shipping JSX files with JSX syntax in them. It was very painful because people wanted to be able to use alternative bundlers and things like that, or realize that the libraries could be used in multiple ways. And it was not a great experience. And I think, if we ended up going in that path, TypeScript is going to have to adopt some stuff that is like, oh, are we going to have to compile and like put it in a separate place once we hit Node modules so that we can cache these things and do all these sorts of, there are architectural concerns on our side for supporting these sorts of workflows. So like, I think it is our job to at least provide that perspective to avoid what could be a very bad experience over time. So.
Marco?
Yeah. So like in terms of I will go from late. So in terms of supporting TypeScript in Node modules, I think that ship probably has sailed with the JSR registry, which does exactly that. And if like with Dino doing specifically that. So this is something that already exists in the ecosystem. It's not something new. So like trying to stop it probably seems like try to fight against the ocean in a way. Like I don't know about that.
I think there's a sort of a misunderstanding though of like what it means to publish to JSR versus to publish to NPM, and that's the thing. It doesn't. I mean, it ships TS conceptually but it's really about like you ship it, but it's what Wesley has said, right? It builds on the registry. It provides you with like source if you're in the right client, but not necessarily if you're on like npm if you're using it through npm, for example, right? So it has that affordance because it's a little bit smart about what it's providing, right?
Wes?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, like, my opinion. Do not look to Dino as a good example for how to handle TypeScript in a runtime. Dino has made a lot of strong opinions, and those opinions make it so we actually can't, as TypeScript, recommend it as a runtime because it makes too many ecosystem breaking, changing, and like subsetting choices. They have very strong opinions there, and those strong opinions basically make them their own little bubble, which is probably very good for selling services on Dino Deploy and the JSR registry. But they're not things that make it so they integrate into the broader JavaScript and TypeScript ecosystem well. They're choices they made. They're not necessarily choices we support. They have to ship their own language service, ship their own CLI wrapper. They're basically a flavor of TypeScript all their own. They have syntactic constructs that behave differently in Dino TypeScript compared to normal TypeScript. Like, this isn't something we say publicly, but Dino TypeScript functions on like a basic level. It's not something that is like good whole TypeScript.
Jake?
I think I wanted to just mention the JSR thing, just from the point of view that the way that JSR works, to my understanding, is that you have a specific TS config that you publish with, right? And you upload your code as source, but when it's delivered to say npm users, you're going to get DTS files and JS files. And then Dino is different because it actually like processes the source. But the difference is that if you're in the Node ecosystem and you're using JSR, the user publishing the TS code won't actually have like affected anything in that case. And so the concern that I would have about running code inside of Node modules is that like today I can publish a package on npm that includes TS source files that assume certain compiler options inside of TypeScript. So like the class defined versus set difference that I think people cite a lot, or enums. And so the concern is just basically that we never try to execute code that was ever sourced from a config that like I didn't write myself, right? And so like ES build, when it runs code, it will not consider someone like my TS config to actually process node modules at all because the assumptions are different. It'll try to not load the TS code because the JS code is like the actual canonical source of truth. And so I think the question for the node modules things is just, is the intent that you are intending to have people like execute TS code straight out of node modules? Or is this feature intended mainly for like, I'm a person running a script today, just running at the CLI, and I just want to run my quick script in TS, right? I think those are kind of different concerns. And so JSR like is solving the wider problem in a way of like publishing TS code and like how that gets delivered, but it's delivered to people in the format that they're looking for. But when you run the experimental script types, like there's no guarantee that the code that I actually have pulled out of node modules like is actually going to be compatible with that thing. And so that's sort of the question there. But if you never resolve that TS source in the first place, then that's also like not a problem in that sense. Like you don't go by like an export mapping that actually gets there. So that's the sort of like general like publishing TS thing that I wanted to mention.
I guess I'm next. I was just gonna say about that I don't think it's our job to protect users from themselves. I view publishing TypeScript in the npm registry no different than publishing JavaScript that might use fancy new syntax, like or make assumptions about what globals are, a recent version of Node added a global WebSocket, right? So the global list.websocket exists in, I forget what version of Node, 20 and up or something. So if you publish a package that makes reference to that, I would hope that you put like engines node greater than or equal to 20 in there to make sure that that node that you're telling the users my package is only meant to be run by these versions of Node. I think the same would apply, like if we ship TypeScripting and if someone really wants their code to run in Node as TypeScript, it would be the same where like they use the engines config to say this node runs these files. They've tested it in, Node 23.1 or whatever, and it's no different really than JavaScript or new JavaScript syntax. Daniel?
So I get your perspective of, users can ship whatever they want, however they want, but there's a lot of value in establishing sort of community precedent. But if you don't entirely agree with that, which is fine. Like I think there are different perspectives on this, but do you see where we are with our other point as well of like not bifurcating a community, and trying to just assume just help address many of the concerns that you have around stability as well, in terms of like how how TypeScript grows and how Node grows, and how you can still provide a good experience while each of them is able to move at their own pace as well. Like I really don't think that we're very, very conservative about changes to syntax. There are syntaxes that just are very weird, and like we probably would like to change them if we had a time machine as well. I mean, okay, there's not many of them, but there's a couple of edge cases, right? Like precedence on like the type of operator versus indexed access, if you really want to get into that. But like we don't change it, because unless we really, really have a good litmus of saying like this will break literally nobody, that's very rare from our end. So there is that, but if you are not completely sold on that, maybe that decoupling from the first place, right? Like regardless of like, just go with a straight solution that you don't have to think about type stripping either, because as much as there is sort of this feeling like, oh, we have the capacity to do type stripping but not loader stuff, I actually am a little bit like, I think it's more nuanced than that in a lot of cases too. There was also a whole set of discussion that I wanted to have around like loading resolution and things like that, because we really focused on like core language syntax, but not so much what happens if a TypeScript file reads another TypeScript file and how you achieve that and things along those lines. We didn't really get to hit that topic much today, but I think like that's where the devil's in the details too.
So if I could just respond to both of those things. The second one first, if you want to talk about resolution and/or transpilation, why don't you just open an issue about that or each of those directly on the Node.js Loaders repo, and we could like have a focused discussion there. And also on our Slack if you want to join there. With regard to type stripping and transforms, I mean, it sounds like you are saying that the transforms are stable, so theoretically Node could support them. I think we would have to support source maps in order to do so, and then that makes things slower. So personally, like I kind of want to have a version of Node TypeScript support that is just straight type stripping and no transforms allowed, because that's like the fastest possible TypeScript support we can offer. And we have a benefit that you don't, in that we don't have legacy users to support. We could just ship this new flag, and we can't break anyone because no one's been using it before. So like, we could take advantage of the fact that we don't have to support legacy syntaxes, and we can draw this line in the sand of like, this is the subset we're choosing to support because performance, because no need for source maps. And if you want those other things, hey, there's option B over here of -- import TSX or we add another flag to enable transforms, or there are many other options. But that's the appeal to me of what we have in this PR of like, almost everyone should be able to write the TypeScript they want with the subset we have, because it's an almost complete subset and it's as fast as possible. So, Marco?
So in terms of discouraging people from shipping TypeScript files, I think that if we as Node, we discourage the use of TypeScript directly in production, first of all, because of performance and like having JavaScript directly, that would discourage people to just use the TS file, because then in production you want the JavaScript one. So we could relegate this to something to run quickly TypeScript file, but not something that you should do in production, because JavaScript are just faster and you want to be fast. So we can put a disclaimer, we can document this, and I think this would mitigate the problem of people just shipping TS only. Then I think that if we can also add flags to increase and customize a bit the support for features. So like with the basic version, you get the smallest subset. Then if you want to enable the other features, you can have customization with flags to Node. So there is a tiny bit of customization that the user can do, but try to relegate the minimum syntax to that. And also I feel like type stripping solves the problem of like a lot of problems that are TypeScript problem, but should not be Node.js problems, if two TS files have different syntax, we don't care because we just remove everything and it runs just as JavaScript code. With that said, I would just remark that this would be a very experimental feature, would be at the beginning very unstable. So it's not like something set in stone. Experimental feature can be removed. So it's not like, hey, we go out like this and the whole world is going to adopt it. So keep in mind that this is not something that immediately people would something that we cannot change or adopt. So,
and I could just add one more thing. It's like we have like a set of criteria for how to decide if a feature belongs in core or not, and one of them is if it would benefit from being compiled to native, like usually C++ native code. The like install TSX approach, even if TSX depends on SWC or ESBuild or whatever, like Node compiles to I don't know, 40. I mean, Joey knows better than me, different platforms, including like some obscure ones like Solaris and whatever. And so everything that's in Node Core supports the full support matrix that Node supports, which is very unlikely that TSX or any other external package that we guide users toward will support. So like if it's important for Node to support TypeScript everywhere that Node is supported, then it kind of needs to be something in core. And then if it needs to be something in core, it can't be this like user upgradable, pluggable thing. So we're also running out of time. Did anyone have any other? I mean, if I could try to focus and wrap us up, I think I hear your concerns that you basically prefer the loader solution, but and from my perspective that already exists, and we're continuing to work on improving it. If you have ideas for directions that it can be improved, we're happy to take your feedback. Our constraints with type stripping, that it needs to be stable for 3 years and that we're trying to optimize for performance. So if there's ways to improve that within those constraints and within those goals, we're very open to doing those. My takeaway from everything we've heard today is that there's no reason we can't keep going forward with both. Type stripping is experimental. I mean, both type stripping and loader hooks are experimental. We can ship breaking changes to them. It's not, what lands in this first PR is not the end of the story. Anything and everything is subject to change. So we can keep having these conversations. I'm also happy to set up something more formal. If you want like a Node.js/TypeScript group, we can ping you guys on relevant PRs, etc. Give me a point person. I'm happy to organize that kind of stuff. Claudio? Yeah, I can't hear you, Claudio.
Mute.
I'm muted on hardware.
There you are.
I just wanted to surface another topic. I think that's my first time speaking this meeting. Sorry. If we still have 5 minutes or otherwise, we can also do it another time. I'm aware that TypeScript, they use a lot the API docs that we generate in JSON.
Sorry, can I see if Daniel had anything to say about what we were just talking about, and then you can get into
Oh yeah,
the
sure, of course, go
second
ahead.
topic?
I'm yeah. I'm well. Sorry. I'm like trying to absorb a lot of this. So I want to talk about some of these with my broader team as well. I want to kind of sit with the ideas that you've all brought here as well, and get a sense of, would it feel good to have this sort of workflow? What is the right sort of way of approaching it? I do want to say though that a lot of the motivation here is from surveys around like better TypeScript support, and like I don't know if this comes off the wrong way, but also like please also take our feedback seriously as well on this, because if the feedback is we want better TypeScript support, the TypeScript team is trying to provide a perspective of like what are the risks here that will be good and won't be good, right? Like a lot of the concern of we shouldn't do these sorts of things because we don't want to be too prescriptive about it. You need a little bit of that to give a good TypeScript experience, right? And so a lot of this was shaped around trying to treat everybody with TypeScript and try to like actually serve everybody, but there are constraints that make things slower for us and harder for us, and we're working on it. We're trying to make things better. We're trying to make things faster. There's always work to be done to optimize, but it's just sort of like I think everybody wants to be heard here, and so I think it's all good feels, and I wanted to just put that out there. But I think we're going to take some of this seriously and try to understand like what the merits are of each approach. So I don't have an answer for you directly yet. I just have some gut feels. I don't want to like push on that more because you've already heard it. Yeah, and I think we have one more hand up from Claudio.
Yeah. Sorry, Daniel, it's a completely different topic.
I have to drop, but I'll make Marco the host.
Gotcha. So what I want to talk quickly is many years ago from one of the Node Collaborator Summit, I was made aware that the TypeScript team uses a lot the JSON schema that we generate from our API docs for something internally for TypeScript. I'm not sure if it was for generating types for Node or for what exactly. But I remember that back then, TypeScript remember that it was in the summit mentioned that that schema is actually very impractical, and the TypeScript team would eventually want to have something better. So right now in the Node project, we are rewriting the tooling for generating or documentation. We're creating a new parser and a new system that generates the schema of the API docs, and I'd be more than happy to collaborate if anyone from TypeScript wants us to revise the current schema, if there's any feedback, if there's anything they'd like that the JSON had inside or in a different format or in a different way. Since we're tackling this now, and I believe that probably from the JSON version, the TypeScript team is the biggest consumer of this.
I'm not entirely familiar with this space. So if you want to ping me on a repo or ping a couple of us on a repo and just kind of give some background on some of the specifics here, I think it would be a little bit easier to discuss there and help out. If it is this, just to be clear, this is about doc generation from Node core, because I remember there was like a whole thing around like parsing out Markdown docs and then generating DTS from that, or something, maybe vice versa, something like that.
We are changing the way how this works, so I can link you to the repository where we're implementing the whole thing, but pretty much the API doc will. Oops, I did an emoji on the thing somehow. The idea behind the new system is that it creates something like rollup. It's like a hookable system where you can create generators that generate outputs in different formats like HTML, or Markdown, or etc. And the whole API docs, they are parsed and transformed into an AST tree with a lot of modifications so that all those generators can consume and do whatever they want with their raw API docs. So I think, for example, either we can generate a better JSON format that you folks would like better to consume on the TypeScript project, or you can hook up into this new tooling directly and just extract whatever you want. There's a PR right now open which implements the core of the parser. There are some examples of how the JSON format inside, like the AST tree, looks like, and feedback is more than welcome. Yeah, and we can also do this async, on the Slack.
Yeah.
I know I'm just throwing a big monster in the end of the
No,
meeting.
no.
to raise
That's
awareness.
fine. I mean, for some reason, I think like DNS is totally borked for me right now. So go figure. Like GitHub isn't coming up for me, but Jake has a hand up, so I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I don't think that we personally pull in this data, but the DT node types, which are, I would think, 90% community maintained. I believe there's a script that would pull on this like the JSON you're saying that you're trying to not have anymore. So I think that there's like more people than us that actually are more understanding of what this actually entails. I think that they do regularly rerun the script to try to pull in the latest information, but the types themselves are not entirely generated by docs. It's actually just about pulling in doc strings.
Yeah,
so
they said
not
it
so
is
much,
kind of
yeah,
incomplete, and that
types.
they would eventually like this to be better so that they don't need to do a lot of manual work. But that was like 2-3 years ago, and I don't even remember the name of the person. But I'm just saying, I don't know. If any of you would like to, tap into this and just collaborate, if you feel that there's a need for doing this, if you can improve the experience that you folks need, so less things that you need to do manually or to, hack into whatever we generate to generate something else, etc., streamline the process. More than, happy to, do anything that, can support TypeScript better, or Node TypeScript types, or,
Yeah. No, I will be taking a look at this after the meeting, and as soon as I can figure out my connectivity issues, I probably should drop now. But thanks for meeting, everybody.
Yeah.
I think we'll try to keep things on Slack and GitHub until the next Loaders meeting. Sound good?
All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Like we are a bit out of time, but thank you so much for being here. And I think that we can keep the Loaders repository as the place where we can keep having this kind of conversation, and like we can move on together. You can give us feedback and vice versa. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. See ya, everyone.